Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Human Stories, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. The open sign in my window still bled red through the last of the dawn. Coffee hissed in the steel pot, bacon popped, and the radio behind the counter mumbled a farm report between last night's ball scores. I wiped the same ring of syrup from the same corner of the same Formica counter I've wiped for 20 years and told myself that quiet, steady things were what held a life together. Grandma Theo whispered from the swivel stool so softly I almost missed it over the griddle. Mom's not sick. I looked up. 8-year-old chin barely above the counter, backpack still on because he liked the weight of it like a turtle with its shell. His eyes were clear and too careful. That's not a nice thing to say, Theo. I said the way you talk when you hope tone can fix truth. Your mom had an accident. The doctors, the phone on the back wall rang. Unknown number. I snagged it with a hand that smelled like lemons and fryer oil. Mrs. Walker. A man's voice, clean clipped. This is Mercy Ridge Medical Center. Your daughter-in-law, Jenna Ruiz, was brought in following a motor vehicle collision. We're transferring her to intensive care now. My breath held. The griddle hissed like it was answering for me. Lemon and oil turned to metal on my tongue. I'm coming, I said, and I didn't know to whom. I flipped the closed placard, grabbed my keys, and told my cook, Russ, with the faded tattoo of a sailboat to cover the breakfast rush. He made a circle with his thumb and finger like he always did, and I watched it wobble as I pulled Theo's hand and hurried into the thin air. The pickup started on the second try. Theo climbed in without one question. The diner fell away, neon humming bins of onions and potatoes waiting to be peeled like a stage you step off when the script changes mid-line. We drove past the silos and the feed store and the lot, where winter leaves its salt in white lace on every fender. Every light turned red. Each one felt personal. The ER doors opened as if they'd been waiting for us. Mercy Ridge smelled the way hospitals always do: alcohol, plastic, old mop water, and an insult of fresh flowers at the volunteer desk. Danny was there, my boy, slumped into a chair that made him look like a child again. Grease under his nails from the shop knuckles raw, where worry had been chewed into skin, his blue work shirt buttoned wrong at the collar. Ma. He stood, and in 2 steps his head was on my shoulder. The last time he cried into my shirt, he was 16, and a girl had said forever and meant Tuesday. A paramedic wheeled an empty gurney past us, separated from his crew chart, swinging from a clip. He talked without looking, the way people do after long nights. Weird thing he said to no one. Reflexes looked pretty normal in the rig, pupils reactive. Then he caught himself and kept moving. I filed the sentence away where I keep important things between the throat and the ribs. They took us to a room where important voices live. A man in a crisp white coat stood under a fluorescent that did his face no favors. I'm Dr. Alden Kent, he said. We're doing everything we can. Ms. Ruiz suffered a head injury. She's in a deep coma. Prognosis is guarded. Guarded. It sat on the table between us like a paperweight on an empty page. Can we see her, Danny asked. His voice had gravel where there used to be music. Through the glass, Dr. Kent said, for now. The ICU was a quiet aquarium of beeps and pale light. Behind the window, Jenna lay so still I wanted to tap the glass to make sure the world hadn't paused. Tubes. Tape. The machine's green line drawing mountains and valleys over her. I remembered the way she used to tuck hair behind her ear, with 2 fingers absent-minded when she stirred a pot of chili at my stove. The hair was braided now. The ear looked small. Theo pressed his forehead to the glass. His breath fogged the pain and cleared, fogged and cleared. He put his palm up like he could match her pulse through it. Can she hear me, he asked. They say hearing is the last thing to go, I said. My voice surprised me. It had the wrong steadiness. A nurse with a Navy badge that read Gomez Lila adjusted something on the pump, and stepped back without meeting our eyes. I watched the way her thumb paused on the button, the way she checked the hall before she turned. Danny lowered into the plastic chair beneath the window. He put his face in his hands and did nothing for a long time. I stood with Theo and listened to the geography of a machine breathe for a person I wanted to scold for leaving shoes in the hall, for eating the last of the peach pie and denying it with a laugh. The scold lived on the same shelf as the paramedics' remark, in the place for things that might matter later. We stayed until the edges of morning broke into noon on the clock across from the nurses' station. Visiting rules pretended to be strict and then bent for sadness, as they always do. Volunteers offered coffee and brochures. The brochures were all about grace and coping. Coffee never tastes like anything in hospitals. It tastes like waiting. Theo tugged my sleeve. He had been quiet since we walked in, so utterly good that I wanted to carry him until both our backs gave out. "Grandma," he said, same whisper as the diner, but with more weight. "Can I show you something?" "Not now, sweetheart," I said, because adults have a reflex to shove later into anything that scares them. He tugged again, little hand insistent, not rude. We stepped 2 doors down where a soda machine blinked a price no one had exact change for. The hallway hummed with vents and that human murmur that never stops in big buildings. Theo slid a phone from his backpack. Danny's old one battered at the corners, a spider web in the upper right of the screen. "I took it because Dad said I could watch cartoons while we wait," he said, defending himself before the verdict. He tapped photos with his thumb, then a square with a grainy image, a hospital room through a crack of light. The timestamp last night late. At first there was nothing, the blue wash of a monitor on a blank wall, the edge of a bed rail, a shape in a bed still as the idea of stillness. Then the shape moved. Not a twitch, not a reflex. An eye opened, slow, deliberate, like the room had asked permission to exist. The head turned. Her hand came up, scratched a cheek where tape had itched, careful not to dislodge anything. The other hand found the water cup with the pink bendy straw. She lifted, sipped, set it down, closed her eyes again. The mountains on the monitor never argued. A moment later, the same hand found the call button, hovered, retreated. The face went patient still. The phone was small and the hallway felt too large for the scene it now held. The vending machine rattled like it too had seen something it wouldn't admit. I watched the clip again, then again, in that little square that seemed to grow until it took up the entire day. "Don't be mad," Theo said. I didn't know what to do. I put a hand on his shoulder, needing the contact to remind me where the floor was. The lemon on my skin from the diner had been replaced by alcohol and plastic, by the smell of a building that preserves bodies from the chaos of outside. "I'm not mad," I said, and heard how far away I sounded. We stood like that a long moment, boy. Woman phone, while a cart squeaked past, and a door opened somewhere and a nurse laughed at a joke that didn't travel down the hall. Then I slipped the phone into my apron pocket, because that is what my hands knew to do with things that mattered, keep them close where heat can find them. When we walked back to the glass, Danny was in the same chair, same hands, same posture. Of a man trying to hold himself together by not moving at all. Behind the window, nothing had changed. The beeps were still mountains and valleys, the braid still neat, the tape still a pale rectangle on a cheek that had been scratched once by the person wearing it. I reached for Theo's hand and he gave it like it had always belonged to me. We stood at the glass until the clock said noon and the coffee in the styrofoam cup went cold in Danny's hands. I told him I had to get back to the diner for the lunch crowd, that Theo needed a sandwich and homework and something ordinary to hold. He nodded without looking up, and I left him in the plastic chair that had learned his shape. The town was bright and wind-chapped. Back at sunrise, I flipped the sign to open, and the bell over the door performed its one trick. Fryers thumped back to life. The grill spit and sang. Theo sat at the end of the counter with crayons and a kid's menu, drawing rectangles that were supposed to be trucks, but looked like buildings with wheels. Every few minutes, he checked the apron pocket where my phone pressed warm against my hip, like he needed to make sure the proof still existed, People came because hunger can't read a calendar. Farmers with caps salt-stained at the brim. A mail carrier with a sunburn that forgot October. 2 high school boys who whispered and laughed and pretended not to watch the waitress with cherry hair. I poured coffee and wiped rings and performed that sleight of hand you learn when your living is on display. You turn your face into a simple thing so people don't have to carry it out with their leftovers. The wall phone near the pie case rang as a busboy dropped a tub of glasses and apologized to gravity. "Sunrise Diner," I said. "Mrs. Walker." The voice was clean, the same clean as the hospital. "Dr. Kent at Mercy Ridge. I wanted to update you personally. Ms. Ruiz would benefit from transfer to our private neuroobservation suite. It allows for longer-term monitoring, one-on-one night staff, additional imaging as needed." "What does it cost?" I asked, because there are sentences that only come with one neighbor. "Insurance will review. In the interim, the daily rate is reflected as facility charges. We can arrange automatic billing." "Send it in writing," I said. My hand left a lemon-shaped shine on the receiver. "I'm at work." "Of course," he said, a softness like gauze over glass. "Time matters in these cases." He hung up and the phone tasted like pennies. I set down 2 plates of meatloaf, wrote "Kent Private Suite" on the corner of my order pad and underlined it twice. The email landed 10 minutes later from Buckeye Savings and Loan. REUL0C application, Sunrise Diner property. 0 with a line through it, as if even the subject line had been forged by someone who didn't speak our language. "We received your online application to open a home equity line of credit using 14 River Street Sunrise Diner as collateral. Please confirm property ownership and identity. Attached, please find the notarized authorization provided indicating your consent." There was a PDF. It opened to a scan with a notary stamp at an angle, as if the paper had tried to slide out from under the hand that pressed it. My name was in a font that didn't know me. The signature looked like mine in the way a scarecrow looks like a person from the highway, and only if you're driving fast. The notary's name, Marilyn Tate, Franklin County, wore a date 1 day old. I printed the thing and felt the ink dry. My hands wanted to tear it, so I put it under the till instead, next to the folded bills and the stack of guest checks with gravy freckles. My mother's wedding ring clicked against the drawer rail. Theo watched me the way you watch someone carrying a cake too close to the edge of a table. He was halfway through a grilled cheese when the door swung in and the weather changed. 3 men took up the front of my diner like they had paid for the air. Their jeans were new and their boots weren't, and the tallest one's scalp was shaved to the shine of a polished cue ball. He smiled without using anything above the teeth. "Afternoon," he said, but it was a word for night. He tapped 2 fingers on the counter like he was testing wood grain. "We're looking for Jenna." I pulled a coffee pot because I am a woman of habits and props. "She's in the hospital," I said. "You'll want Mercy Ridge?" He took the cup I didn't offer. "We'll want our money," he said. He slid a page out of a manila folder. It was thick paper with lines and boxes and a signature I recognized too well. "I-O-U J. Ruiz." Numbers 28,000 and change with a smaller number below labeled VIG, as if someone had tried to make interest sound like sunlight. "Investments," the cue ball said. "Sports numbers, crypto that didn't stay where it was supposed to." She said the doctor had a way to make things right. Said there was paper coming to take care of it. The bell over the door rang again and nobody came in. The diner made the sound things make when they hold their breath. "You brought this to a diner," I said. "You can bring it to the police too. They take paper." He smiled again and the room got smaller. "We like kitchens," he said. "People tell the truth where they eat." 1 week. He tapped the page. "Before we come back and ask different." I had $800 in small bills in the safe under the flour bags kept for the sort of emergency I had always imagined as a busted oven or a broken axle. I went to the back and came out with half of it in an envelope that already knew how sorry it was. I put it on the counter. He looked at it the way you look at a tip that measures a man. He took it anyway, tucked it in like it belonged to him. 1 week, he said, and the bell worked again. After they left the room, remembered itself. The mail carrier asked for extra ice. The high school boys stared at their plates like they'd never met food. Theo's crayon made a dark rectangle that tore the paper. Danny appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, a towel over his shoulder, eyes swollen like he'd slept in salt. "Who were they?" he asked. "Wrong address," I said, and he knew it wasn't true. He went to the sink and ran water he didn't need, and I watched him not drink. The afternoon tilted. Teachers let out and 2 came in for pie. Mrs. Knowles from the elementary school put a hand on my arm and said, "Theo had been quiet lately, which is what people say when they mean silent." I told her we were working on it, and she said of course and asked for whipped cream. I closed at 8 because there are days you shorten on purpose. Theo fell asleep in the booth with his jacket for a blanket pencil still in his hand, eraser worn down to brass. I flipped the chairs mopped in long, slow lanes and let the radio find an old country song that understood how a guitar can be both a tool and a raft. When the doorbell rang again, the night admitted Hank Calloway. He had a jaw like a toolbox and a ball cap from a feed store that closed 5 years ago. Once when he wore a uniform, he sat in that same booth and told me how the interstate smells after a snow. Now he carried a small black case and the kind of flashlight police keep even when they stop being police. "You rang," he said, and looked past me at the boy asleep in the vinyl. I poured coffee because there are ceremonies older than trouble. We sat 2 stools apart like church. I set my phone between us and pressed play. He didn't say Jesus the way men do in movies. He watched like a mechanic who knows when something is lying about a noise. When it ended, he asked to see the timestamp, then asked me to run it again. He didn't ask how I got it. He didn't ask if I was sure what I saw. He took a cable from his case and made my phone talk to his laptop until the clip lived in 2 places. "Hospital's got access control," he said. Like we were discussing weather rolling in. Badge readers on those ICU doors. Cameras on the service corridor and nurse's desk. If she's moving the doors talking. "Can you hear it?" I asked. "I know a guy who listens to buildings for a living." He lifted his cup. "Curtain facilities." He stepped outside to make the call. The neon sign threw red across his face and turned him into a warning nobody heeded in time. When he came back, he had the look of a man who had been allowed into a room he shouldn't enter and had taken off his shoes anyway. "They keep logs," he said. Kurt pulled East ICU 24 hours back. 2 swipes on Jenna's door after midnight. 1 badge is your nurse Gomez. The other entry's not a swipe. It's a contact from inside. Door sensor reads open from room side at 2:14 and 2:31. That's not reflex. He spread the printouts on the counter where people sometimes leave birthday cards. The numbers ran in soldier rows, 02, 14, 07. Door open interior handle. 02, 14, 09, door closed. 0, 31. 22. Door open interior handle. 0 to 31. 25 door closed. Down the margin was the room number and the date and a tiny logo that said Mercy Ridge. In a font that looked too polite for what it was telling me, the phone in my pocket had turned into a hot stone. The forgery under the cash drawer hummed like a live wire. Theo snored a small, even snore, the sort of sound you will spend your life protecting once you decide it belongs to you. I ran my finger down the columns without touching them and watched the times match the little white numbers in the corner of a shaky video. The bell over the door didn't ring. The diner held still. Outside, a semi rolled through town on its way to somewhere the map makes look easy. Hank took a pen and circled the entries like they were tracks in dust. I didn't say anything. The paper lay there under the neon, and for once the red glow wasn't a warning, but a simple fact. Something had moved when it shouldn't have, and the building had dutifully written it down. Hank took the printouts with him when he left 2 sheets clipped under the receipt spike like they were just another order for Patty Melts. I carried Theo out to the truck, his head on my shoulder, his breath warm through my flannel. At home, he went down without a fight pencil still tucked behind his ear, a smudge of graphite on his cheekbone like a tiny flag. I sat at the table with the forged HELOC, the door logs and the diner's rent ledger spread in a fan. The paper said 2 different things in 2 different languages. One spoke of days and eggs and coffee. The other said someone had reached into my life with a clean white coat and a rubber stamp. At first light, Hank knocked twice and didn't wait for a third. He wore the same ball cap the brim sweat faded where a body remembers thinking. Scene's 5 miles outside town, he said. County Road 11 at the quarry curve. You up for a drive? I wrote a note for Russ and taped it to the register with blue painter's tape, the kind that doesn't take finish with it. Theo slept on. Mrs. Pickens from next door agreed to listen for the school bus. The truck started easy this time. Beyond the grain elevator, the land flattened into that particular Ohio honesty, soy corn stubble and sky. The curve carried the ghosts of 10 winters' tar snakes in the asphalt like healed scars. The guardrail was the color of regrets. Hank stood in the gravel shoulder with his hands on his hips and let his eyes do whatever measuring eyes do. Tow guy said the sedan bounced off that rail, came to rest on the shoulder. Airbags, but no intrusion. You see a second set of tracks. The gravel told a single story. Light scuffs from a small sedan, a shallow angle. No cross-traffic ruts, no shattered bits you get when 2 things argue at speed. Hank walked the length of the scrapes, squatted where rubber had burned a skinny arc. He pulled a pocket knife, shaved mud from a bolt head on the rail, sniffed it like a man who knows the taste of heat. No paint transfer different than her own, he said. She came in hot and turned. Nobody hit her. A red Kenworth pulled into the lot of the quarry office brakes, singing down the hill. The driver climbed out 40 Iowa ball cap, the weary politeness of someone who has a schedule. Hank hailed him with a 2-finger wave. You run a dash cam, he asked when the man got close enough to smell his coffee. County needs a look. Accident there last night. The driver shrugged like a man whose life is videotape and receipts. Pioneer Freight makes us keep 'em rolling, he said. You got a USB. Hank did. In the cab's sun-bleached upholstery and plastic saints on the dash, the man scrolled back to a timestamp that matched the hospital intake. We watched through a bug-specked windshield at 125 speed empty road, then a silver sedan entering from a side street steady lane, then a sharp break and a hard right turn like someone remembered a promise. No headlights in the mirror, no deer, no anything but choice. The car scraped the rail, settled blinkers on. The truck rolled by a horn tap like a prayer that someone would be okay. The driver copied the clip without asking for a signature. Hank offered 20 in cash, and the man took 10 because some gestures quiet what bills can't. Back in town, the diner filled itself with coffee steam in the part of morning that pretends to be calm. Hank set up at the end of the counter like a traveling office. He called Kurt in facilities. He called a friend at Buckeye Savings who owed him from a fishing weekend. He called a pharmacist he knew from a case so old he misremembered the weather. Between calls, he ate a piece of cold bacon without tasting it and flipped through a small notebook that had seen rain. Kurt sent over more logs, not just doors. Camera Ping's badge swipes the polite hum of a building narrating its own breathing. 2 stills. 2 a blur of braid and hospital gown, a white coat on top. A figure slipping from the ICU corridor into a hall that led to administrative suite's timestamp well after midnight. Down the hall, a light leaked from under a door labeled A. Kent, MD. The stills weren't art. They didn't need to be. The email from Buckeye Savings came mid-morning, forwarding a fraud alert. For your awareness, it read, the notarized authorization for HELOC appears inconsistent with on-file signatures. Our internal check flagged the notary stamp as belonging to a commission registered to Marilyn Tate, currently suspended. The submission IP traced to a proxy. We have paused the application pending confirmation. It was corporate calm over something that had teeth. I printed that too. The printer at Sunrise is old enough to vote. It leaves a faint gray on the left margin. I've always liked the imperfection of it, the way machines tell you they're trying. Hank slid the page into a clear sleeve and wrote, Buckeye. Buckeye paused across the top. Around noon, I took 2 coffees in paper cups and rode the elevator at Mercy Ridge to a floor with carpet that tried to be quiet. On the way up, I watched my face in the steel of the doors and practiced saying ordinary words. Lila Gomez was coming off a night shift when I found her near the alcove with the ice machine nobody uses. Her badge hung crooked. Her eyes looked like someone else's until you said her name. Have a coffee, I said, offering the one with more cream. Sit a second. She laughed a little at nothing. People in hospitals laugh like that so they can keep standing. The first sip put color in her cheeks. We sat on the edge of an unused wheelchair scale. We've been grateful for you, I said. You move careful. People see it. Her eyes filled so fast, I thought she'd been holding water in them and forgot. She looked past me down the hall, then at the ceiling tile above us, the one with the hairline crack. I have a brother who needs an inhaler every month, she said. Insurance says yes until it says no, and the price goes wherever it wants. Dr. Kent puts cash in an envelope, and envelopes make worries sleep for a while. What did he ask for? My voice did that steadiness thing again. Small doses, she said. Just enough to quiet things at night. Not to stop, to hush. He said family rest is important and we don't want agitation. He signed orders with big words. I draw up a little in a tuberculin syringe, the kind with tiny lines. This much. She held her fingers a whisper apart. Last night I asked. Her face said everything for a second, so clearly we could have turned the words off. He writes that I'm to page him if motor activity increases, she said. But he also says he needs quiet after midnight for other cases. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, furious at a leak. I don't know what I am in this story. Somebody's daughter, I said. She looked at the floor and nodded once like a child. She tore a page from a pocket notebook. Arden Clinical LLC in Dr. Kent's careful hand, a P.O. box, a contact labeled Marilyn Mobile Notary, and a number. He uses that company to order supplies the hospital doesn't track, she said. The packages come in the back with linen. She pressed the paper at me like the kind of gift you give to absolve a debt you can't pay any other way. At Kings Mill Pharmacy, the owner wore a white coat gone gray at the cuffs. Hank stood at the counter with his old badge in his wallet, and a tone that made rules feel friendly. The owner looked at the paper Lila had given us, glanced at the back office, where a tech counted pills, then printed receipts from an account named Arden Clinical, lidocaine vials, clonidine, patches, syringes by the box, dexamide, timidine ampoules, tiny precise sleep for the parts of people hospitals find inconvenient. The pickup signatures were a neat loop and an open AA. Kent. Hank asked for copies. The owner said he'd send them to the county investigator if one called. Hank said he had an email address those files could try first. By late afternoon, we had a folder that clicked when you moved it. Toward evening, we went back to Mercy Ridge, not to the ICU, but to the nurse manager on duty. Family would like to retrieve patient property for safekeeping, Hank said. The manager sighed and checked a metal cabinet that held zippered bags with barcodes. Jenna's bag weighed more than it looked. Inside were folded leggings, a coin purse with $6 in nickels, and 2 phones, one glitter case cracked, one cheap and black with tape over the brand name. The glitter one chirped to life with Danny's lock screen of Theo in a paper crown. The black one woke to no service and a home screen stripped of personality. In messages, nothing. In photos, nothing. In mail, a draft unsent, staccato, and ugly. Money clears when doc signs transfer from long-term care fund will square us with red pike. Keep off my doorstep till then. It wasn't English the way you were taught it. It was the language people use when they think words are only for getting from one bad place to a better one. "Don't take it," Hank said, reading my face. "Photograph every screen, return the bag to inventory, chain matters." I used his phone to take photos of my own hands holding a stranger's plan. The act felt like stealing and like cleaning. Outside dusk collected along the hospital's wall where vines tried and failed to climb brick. Hank thumbed his notebook, rewrote a list on a fresh page, and drew a line between items like a man laying track. "Dashcam shows no impact," he said, not to reassure and not to scare. "Door logs show activity from inside the room. Pharmacy receipts tie an off-book account to Kent. Nurse says microdoses. Black phone draft mentions red pike. Bank says HELOC pause with a dirty stamp. And your email from Kent about private neuro suite. That's enough to take upstairs." Upstairs where I asked, though I already knew. "The uniform you wear leaves a shape in your voice even when the fabric's gone." "County," he said. Chief Marla Briggs held her office in a brick building that used to be a post office and still smelled like mail on rain days. She wore her hair in a bun that didn't care what you thought of it, and a jacket that had seen 3 budgets. She listened without fixing her face. When people try to be polite to police, they talk too much. We didn't. We let paper talk. Ada Nora Pike came in halfway through. She had a legal pad full of squares and a way of clicking her pen that kept time without a song. She looked at the dash cam, the logs, the receipts, the phone photos, the forged notary. "The doctor is a public-facing figure," she said. "We'll do this clean." Chief Briggs called a detective with allergy eyes and sent him to Mercy Ridge with a request for preservation. She ordered copies of access logs direct from facilities with an officer in the room. She told Hank to sit in the hall and drink water like he was family, because sometimes you can do more as what you aren't. By the time the courthouse lights flicked on, the folder in my lap had a new shape, government stamps, intake forms, a sheet with boxes to check for evidentiary chain. I signed where they told me. Hank initialed where initials live. Nora slid a second folder back across the desk, to me a twin without the parts they couldn't let go. "You keep your copy," she said. People sleep better when paper doesn't live only in one drawer. When we stepped out into the parking lot, the evening had cooled enough to make breath show. The town settled into itself, the train horn down by the river, the clink of flatware in the Chinese place, the smell of fryer oil outside my own kitchen door soaked into the bricks, so deep it would outlast us all. I drove home with both hands on the wheel, the folder on the seat beside me like a passenger. In the diner, I locked the back door and turned the chair legs up onto tables one by one. Each upswept chair made the same soft protest. Theo's drawing from the afternoon lay on the counter where he'd left it, a big rectangle with wheels and a crooked sign over it that read "Sunrise with the eye missing." I filled the eye in with a dull pencil and set the picture under the salt shaker to keep it from moving. The neon open sign hummed even though it was dark. Some things can't help but say what they are. I turned the switch and let silence have the room. Morning came clear and hard. I dropped Theo at school with his backpack zipped and his chin lifted the way he does when he wants to be brave for someone else. The diner opened on Russ's hands and muscle memory. I left him the key to the pie cooler and a note about the lunch special. The folder rode shotgun again buckled in. Mercy Ridge had that weekday hush that sits on hospitals like a blanket televisions, low carts, whispering coffee that had given up. A volunteer in a cardigan pointed me to a family conference room off the ICU. A small box with a laminate table, 6 chairs, and a window that faced a brick wall. Danny came in behind me, a day older than he'd been last night. He smoothed his shirt like it had a wrinkle he could fix by force. Dr. Alden Kent arrived with a file and a mouth that knew how to shape sympathy. A nurse wheeled in a consent cart, pens in a cup, a stack of forms, a lime green folder labeled Advanced Directives. Lila Gomez hovered by the door with a clipboard and kept her eyes on the floor tile where 2 colors didn't quite meet. "Thank you for coming on short notice," Kent said. "We've seen no clinically meaningful change." He placed a document on the table and turned it so we could read it right side up. "In these situations, we discuss goals of care. This is standard financial matters, medical power of attorney, options for extended neuro observation. We can start the transfer to the private suite this afternoon." He laid a pen on the line where someone was supposed to write themselves into a smaller life. Danny stared at the page. I watched Kent's hand. The nails were neat. The wedding band was plain. A small freckle sat at the base of his thumb, the kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were counting. The door clicked. Chief Marla Briggs stepped in with 2 officers in plain suits. Their jackets didn't bulge, their faces didn't either. Behind them, ADA Nora Pike carried a thin folder and the kind of calm that comes when you're holding heavy paper. The volunteer in the cardigan watched the scene from the doorway, the way a person watches weather they didn't order. Dr. Kent Briggs said, voice even. "Ms. Ruiz's family has provided materials of concern. We're executing a preservation order for digital records and a limited search warrant for controlled substances and off-book supply chains associated with Arden Clinical LLC. Copies are here." She handed him the warrant. He took it the way a person takes a delicate thing they don't want to admit is real. "I must insist you speak with hospital counsel," he said. "Patient privacy is exactly why we're preserving logs and footage before anything gets misplaced," Nora said, tapping the footer where a judge's name lived. Her pen clicked once and stopped. "We'll be polite and quick. Nurse Gomez, thank you for waiting." Lila's throat moved. She didn't step back. Hank slid into a corner like he'd always been there. He set a body-worn camera on the table and said nothing. The room shrank to fit the air inside it. Briggs turned to Danny. "Mr. Walker will keep this in the open so you're not hearing secondhand. Your mother provided a video. Facilities provided door and badge logs. The pharmacy provided receipts. The bank flagged a forged authorization against your family's property." She kept her hands in view. "We do this methodically. Nobody's raised their voice." Kent looked at me the way a man looks at a nail that surprises him by becoming a screw. "This is an outrageous misunderstanding," he said, and produced a smile that didn't light anything. "Families grasp at patterns in grief. We see it often." "Then you won't mind transparency," Nora said. We moved to the ICU corridor. Nurses worked with the shoulders-up focus of people who know commotion from care. Briggs asked Lila to pull the door logs up on a station monitor. Lila's fingers shook once and then found the rhythm of their job. The screen filled with lines of time. Briggs read aloud, 02:14 a.m., interior handle activation. 02:31 a.m., interior handle activation. No badge swipes logged for entry. Doors do not open themselves. We stood at the glass of Jenna's room. She lay like she had yesterday, tubes tidy braid straight tape neat. Machines made their measured landscape. A family member sobbed down the hall miles away. Lila checked the hallway, then opened the ICU door for us. Briggs stepped just inside. "Dr. Kent, you'll want to see this in context," she said and nodded to Hank. He lifted his phone and mirrored to a wall monitor, the one used to show imaging to people who don't know how to read it. The clip Theo had taken filled the screen a bed of figure. Then the eye opening, the scratch, the straw, the deliberate stillness. No commentary, no soundtrack, just the fluorescent hum that all hospitals share. Danny's body went still in a way that made space hide. He didn't look at me. He watched the screen like it might change its mind. Kent cleared his throat and moved toward the bed rail with the doctor's easy authority. "This is classic subcortical activity," he said. "Decerebrate posturing can mimic." "Don't," Briggs said, "not loud, not rude, not now." Nor handed Lila a printed list. "Controlled substance inventory for the last 2 weeks," she said. "Let's see what the computer thinks the drawers hold." Lila keyed through levels of access until a screen with boxes appeared. Med names, units, dispensed initials. Hank read each item softly, like calling bingo dexmedetomidine ampoules, clonidine patches, TB syringes, off-cycle ordering under Arden Clinical. He looked at Kent. That last one isn't a hospital department. Kent's voice lost some polish. We use supplemental vendors for shortages. Then you won't mind showing the invoices, Nora said. And who approved them? Lila moved to the bedside pump. She's not on Dexmed right now, she said, pointing. Propofol order is PRN, nothing running. Her thumb hovered over the display as if it could sense the truth of a thing. Briggs took her time. Ms. Ruiz, she said, talking through the machine's breath. My name is Marla. We're from the county. If you can hear me, we're here for clarity. Silence does its tricks in rooms like that. It fills its own pockets. Then Jenna's left eyelid flickered. Not a tremor, a choice. The corner of her mouth tightened like a person catching a swear. A half-second later, the fingers of her right hand taped to a board, for the IV curled and released in a rhythm that had nothing to do with reflex arcs. Lila sucked in air and stepped back against the monitor. Danny made a sound low in his chest that I will never not be able to hear. Kent's face tried to arrange itself into science. It failed. Hank lifted the phone higher and began recording Len's steady reflection of the monitors, blinking in the glass. Time-stamped observation, he said, voice flat as road. Jenna's eyes opened. Both. The room didn't move. She looked from face to face, found Danny, and then slid her gaze past him like a thief who'd miscounted locks. Her lips parted. The sound she made had scales in it, low, then higher, then steady as a person learning a room. What are you doing? She said, and the words came whole. Danny swayed and put a palm to the glass, as if he were the one outside. I stood a step behind him and felt my own hand find the old shape of a prayer without the words. Ms. Ruiz, Nora said, stepping into the doorway, careful with the edge of her voice. You don't have to speak. Anything you say can be documented. Do you understand? Jenna licked her lips like a person tasting a lie before she serves it. I'm in pain, she said. What you need is your counsel. Kent cut in too fast. This woman is not competent to, Dr. Briggs said, and now her voice had authority's weight. She produced a second paper from her folder and passed it to him. You're detained on suspicion of insurance fraud, prescription fraud, and conspiracy to obtain property by deception. She nodded to the officers. Phones, devices, and keys. The plain suits moved like men who preferred not to do this twice. Kent put up a hand that was suddenly small. This is insane, he said, and the word didn't fit his mouth. One officer took his phone, another removed a key card from his coat pocket and placed it in a bag. Nora noted each item aloud. Lila turned and busied herself with a drawer because there was no place to put her eyes. Downstairs, outside the main entrance, 2 unmarked cars idled where patient drop-offs usually kiss and go. The cue ball from yesterday stood on the sidewalk like he owned concrete. He didn't see the officers until he did. The arrest happened in the slow, tidy way that never makes the news hands. Behind Reed, your right's a passenger door that opens and closes like any other. Another officer crossed the lot to a second man leaning against a Chevy with a dented fender. A third car slid in behind Gentle as a parent, guiding a child across the street. In the ICU, Jenna watched the corner where the ceiling met the wall as if she could climb out that way. I was scared, she said, stage whisper thin. Nothing was working. He said there was a plan. Danny spoke for the first time, and his voice sounded like gravel turning back into rock. You looked at our boy, he said, syllables heavy. He talked to you through that glass. Her jaw worked. No words came out. The machine kept drawing mountains and valleys faithful to its job. Nora nodded to the charge nurse. We need Ms. Ruiz medically evaluated in her true state, she said. Full neuro exam, video recorded, independent attending. The charge nurse nodded back a brisk dip that said she knew how to move a day forward when it had shifted under her shoes. Briggs turned to me. Mrs. Walker, she said, we'll want your original clip. We'll return your phone after a forensic copy." She paused. "You did right to keep it close." I gave her the device. The screen was warm from my hand. The apron pocket felt suddenly light, like it always does when you give up a tool you've learned to trust. We stepped back into the corridor to give the nurses the room they needed to be what they are. Danny leaned his head against the glass and breathed like a runner who had found the end of a road he didn't know he'd been on. Lila paged respiratory with a steady finger. Hank stood with his back to the wall pen, scratching the small notebook in slow lines. I watched the red exit sign at the end of the hall burn its unassuming instruction into the day, and I thought about thresholds, the ones doors mark and the ones people do. Outside, sirens didn't rise. They didn't need to. The building kept its own record. The forms waited in their lime green folder for a story they wouldn't get to tell. When I left the hospital, the sunlight was thin but honest. I drove to the diner. The bell over the door did its one trick. Russ lifted a chin hello from the grill, and the coffee into my hand felt like a small, ordinary anchor. Theo's drawing still sat under the salt shaker, the eye where it belonged. I pressed the edge of the paper flat and let the room remember me. The courthouse smelled like dust and coffee that had traveled too far in a styrofoam cup. We sat in the second row, me, Danny, in a clean blue shirt, and Theo swinging one foot in a shoe he'd knotted himself. The ceiling fans turned without helping much. Reporters waited with pens that wanted a bigger city. Ada Nora Pike stood where voices carry. She laid out the pictures we already knew, the dashcam curve with no second car, the door logs that said someone inside opened the door, the receipts in Dr. Kent's careful loop, the draft on the black phone that spoke Red Pike in lowercase. She didn't lean on it. She let paper do its work. Dr. Alden Kent sat at the defense table with a lawyer who kept a hand on his elbow like he might float away. He still looked like a man who irons his shirts. When the clerk read the counts, he answered guilty in a voice that wanted to be clinical and landed on tired. Prescription fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy to obtain property by deception. He signed a plea that asked the judge for mercy the way a form asks for a date. Jenna wore county khaki and a braid that had lost its neatness. She watched her nails in the floor and only sometimes the room. When her turn came, she rose and lifted her chin as if daring a draft to move her. Her lawyer argued debt, bad influence, fear. He said she had been a mother before she was anything else. He said the plan was always temporary. He used the word panic like it could lift a weight. Mrs. Tate, the notary with the stamp that didn't belong to her anymore, was not in the room. A clerk read a statement about a suspension, a side hustle, a bad month. The Red Pike men faced their own judge down the hall, charged with extortion, usury, and the sort of threats that look small on paper and large in a kitchen. The sentences came steady, like numbers checked twice. 6 years for Kent in state custody with a bar from practicing anything that looks like medicine. 5 for Jenna with restitution ordered and credit for the days she pretended to be less alive than she was. Lila Gomez sat behind us with a sweater over her scrubs and blinked hard when the judge called her cooperation material. The board would review her license. For now, she kept her job under a longer shadow and an extra set of signatures. Buckeye Savings mailed a letter on stock paper with a blue line across the top. Application withdrawn. Title unencumbered. We regret the inconvenience. No one at a bank ever says sorry without 3 qualifiers. I pinned the letter inside the office cabinet between the payroll calendar and Theo's school lunch menu. The metal caught the thumbtack with a clean little pop. We walked out into a noon that felt new only because it was ours. Cameras flashed and names were asked, and then we were just people on courthouse steps deciding which way to point our feet. Danny didn't speak until we reached the truck. When he did, his voice surprised him. "I'm taking the shift at McCready's," he said. "The 12 to 8 in the Bay. It keeps me out of the house. It wasn't a promise. It didn't need to be." That week, he went to meetings in a church basement that smelled like coffee and old hymnals. He came by the diner after and cleaned the flat top until the metal mirrored the lights. He and Theo built a ramp in the alley for a scooter that used to be too fast for both of them. Some nights he sat at my kitchen table and let silence be what it was. Other nights he told a story from the shop and laughed before it finished like a man remembering where laughter lives. At sunrise, we put up a sign that said, PIE means peace, because Russ thought it would make tourists take pictures. Regulars brought flowers with plastic sleeves still wet. Mrs. Knowles left a stack of extra readers for anyone who had forgotten theirs. A trucker taped $1 to the coffee pot for the lady who watches our road. I kept the cracked mug I'd almost thrown away the month before and used it every morning because it fit my hand. One afternoon, Leo. No, Theo. I corrected myself again because brains tangle names when they're tired, sat on the end stool and drew the diner a second time. He added a dog that wasn't ours tied to the lamppost, and a slice of pie floated above the counter like a halo. He wrote sunrise without missing a letter. He turned the paper to show me and waited with that open look kids wear when they've made a thing. Put it where people can see, he said. I slid the drawing under the salt shaker by the register so it wouldn't blow when the door opened, then taped a second copy to the pie case, because the case deserved something sweet that didn't melt. The neon open sign burned in the window steady as breath. Lunch came in clumps, farmhands with hands the size of Thanksgiving, a nurse who asked for extra pickles, a kid in a band shirt who tipped in quarters. I wiped a ring of iced tea from the counter that will be there again tomorrow. The bell over the door did its one trick and then did it again. Danny came in at the end of his shift with a smear of grease on his cheek and pretended he didn't know it was there. Theo ran from the booth to meet him, sneakers squeaking on tile, arms up. Evening arrived the way it always does here down the river and across the tracks. I flipped the chairs when it was time. I counted the till and left bills for morning. In the office, I closed the cabinet on the letter from Buckeye and let the thumbtack hold more than paper. When I turned back toward the dining room, the sign in the window glowed red against the glass and reached for the street. I shut it off and listened to the quiet settle over plates and forks and the day we'd gotten through. Then I locked the door, pocketed the key, and walked out into a town that still knew our names. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.